a little bit later in the workshop, but I will send it now so that I don't have to interrupt the flow of the conversation before that. So just 1 second, it's a PDF file that you will receive. Here you go. It should be loading now.
Yeah, so the handout that Teodora have sent is in the chat so that you can download and follow along. Yeah, and it would be nice to see some faces on the screen because, but if it's not convenient because you are traveling or eating dinner, then it's fine. But yeah, it would be nice to see few people and then you can talk to us face to face.
Yeah. I would love to see as many of you as possible, especially during the more interactive parts of this workshop, but again, only if it's possible and convenient for you. Okay, so I think I will start by sharing my screen. Okay, can you see it in full screen? Perfect. So, sorry about my voice. Like Tuan was saying, today we will be exploring the topic of discovering your unique path to calmness. So why? Why do we actually care about this topic? Why did we choose to kind of go in this direction with today's workshop? Is because in our modern society, and especially in leadership roles, in management roles, there is a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of pressure. And I feel like a lot of people really struggle with this. I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in people that I know in my personal life. I've also seen it in the clients that I work with in coaching and in training. And I believe it's a really important topic. And today we will look at it from different perspectives. Enneagram is one of them, like we mentioned before, and as you can see in the handout, but we will also look at some other angles and perspectives. And there will be different moments during the workshop where we can discuss, you can ask questions, you can share, and I would love to hear as much as possible from you about what you feel like you need and what it is that maybe you want an answer for. So, just a brief introduction. My name is Teodora, and I'm originally from Romania, from Eastern Europe, but I currently live in Germany, and I work here as a professional coach and trainer. My background is in psychology and psychotherapy. I studied psychodrama as a method of psychotherapy, and I also worked for a few years in human resources. And then basically since 2020, I've been self-employed as a professional coach, certified by the International Coaching Federation, and also a soft skills trainer. My main focus in the training sessions are communication skills, self-awareness through typology, public speaking skills, and also mental health education. So that's me. You see, I have 3 flags under my picture: Romania, United Kingdom, and Germany. Romania, my hometown and country, UK, where I studied, and Germany, where I currently live and work. Okay, so now I would love to hear a little bit about you. If you maybe could briefly introduce yourself, your name, what it is that you do, whether you have a leadership or management position right now, and something that you would like to learn or discover today. And I will stop the share screen for a couple of moments. Whoever feels comfortable to start, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think you might have to call the name right. There was Elaine, which I know, and Kansha. Actually, I don't know. Terrence, Lian.
If you cannot speak right now, you can also type in the chat, maybe your name and something that you would like to discover today. But if you can speak, I would love to hear a little bit from you.
Well, I'll start. I'm Jean Marie from Singapore. I'm a counselor by profession. And my hope today is to have an openness of heart to discover, to learn, to have new insights. I see myself as having a beginner's mind, so I'm open to learning. So that's my hope for today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jean. So you're a counselor from Singapore and you want to learn, to come with an open heart. Thank you. Anybody else? Again, if you don't have the possibility to turn on your microphone or your camera, feel free to type in the chat what it is that you would like to learn today and what it is that you do as a profession.
Yeah, how about Florence or Terence? Florence is one of the meetup member.
Yeah, Florence. So you're from the Philippines and you are currently working in Singapore as well. Okay. Maybe some curiosity that you have for today's workshop, Florence, something that you want to learn or discover or get an answer for.
Yeah, how about Soja and Terence and Pankaj. Oh, that's a hard link. Pankaj.
Hi, this is Shalja.
Soja, okay.
I was just curious to really understand the personality type, maybe my own personality, and just wanted to explore. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So you want to better understand the personality system and what your type might be. Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. So we still have Terence, Elaine. Yeah, Elaine says, how easy is it to rewire the way we respond? Okay. Yeah, thank you, Elaine. So more developmental perspective. We have certain natural tendencies, and how easy is it to actually change them, to adapt them, to respond differently to the environment? A very healthy and proactive question, I would say. Thank you. Terence, Pankaj, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, I hope. And Layuan, I hope I'm also pronouncing that correctly. Yeah, you're interested to learn more about Enneagram. Okay. I will wait 30 more seconds if anybody wants to share anything. If not, we will move on. Okay. In that case, we'll move on. But please feel free to jump in and type something in the chat if new ideas or new motivations come to mind. Okay, so I would really like to know, also from your perspective, what is it that you find to be the most stressful, the most challenging when you are in the position of a leader or a manager? It doesn't have to be right now. So if you don't have that role currently, but you had it at some point in the past, or you are thinking about it in the future, what is something that you find to be stressful? And maybe as a second question, what are some situations where you feel like your emotions get the best of you? Particularly in the workplace, because we're talking about the leadership and management roles. But if you have any other insights, I would be very, very happy to know or to hear about it. So again, whoever feels free to add something to that, please do it in written form or through speaking. Maybe Tuan, if you want to share something from your perspective just to break the ice a little bit? Or I can also share afterwards as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, when we say as a leader or manager, I mean, I think usually the assumption is that you are like the middle manager. If you're like the owner or the top boss, of course, it's not. I feel it's not so serious. But it's usually when people say they are leader or manager, it has a usually it's an issue if you are like in the middle management and you will have responsibility to both the upper management and your under reports. So my experience was either as to make it's very difficult to make a balance between one common thing is that as a middle manager it's difficult to reconcile the expectation from the top management and to communicate that to my interns or some of the person under my team because on one hand you want to make the upper management happy, and usually the common pattern is that they want things fast, they want things perfect, they want things fast and perfect. That is the owner or the boss is, and of course you're the one that work with you or for you, they have their own problem. You understand their problem better. They need more time, they need more certain thing cannot be done. It's a very difficult thing to it's like how to bring a point from the upper manager to your co-worker without upsetting their feeling, without getting getting balance. And that's the same. Yeah, I think it's more of the common thing is that I feel like, at least for me, is not to upset or be to appear too demanding with my under reports.
Makes a lot of sense, and thank you for sharing. I can relate. When I was working in human resources, I was once leading a team, and like you, I was in middle management. So I had to report to the CEO of the company and also to the client that I was a project manager for, basically. But I also had a team of direct reports. And this balancing of the manager's expectations, the client's expectations, and also handling what was going on with the team and their stressors and their issues was also for me very overwhelming. And I remember it led me into a state of burnout. I will explain why when we get to the Enneagram part, because as a type 2 in Enneagram, it's very common for us to go through these types of patterns. But I kind of imagine it like a sandwich where you have the top pressuring you and the bottom pressuring you, and you almost feel like you're squeezed in between. Yeah, so common experience. Anyway, so anybody else, what comes up for you, either for the first question or for the second question or for both? Something that pops up.
I would say that, I mean, there are a number of stresses, but what's difficult for me as a leader or manager is when there's a conflict or misunderstanding or different opinions. I'm not sure why it's difficult for people or team or my co-workers to be able to trust and to speak to the issue. There seems to be a lot of withdrawal or murmurings outside the workplace. It's hard, or perhaps there's no capacity for someone to deal with conflict or manage. And so the elephant in the room stays there all the time, and it's hard to address it if people are not willing enough to trust and to work through it and stay at the table. I think that's very stressful for me as a leader.
So for you, it's basically what you observe in the external world, that colleagues are not addressing the real problem. They're running away from conflict. They're not trusting each other. And that creates a lot of stress and pressure for you if you're in that environment.
Yes, because my value And my value is team approach and everyone working together and not in silos and each one being so individualistic. I'd like to create that team approach and that works well when that happens.
Yeah. So there's also a conflict of values where the things that you value are very hard to be reflected in the work day, basically, or the day-to-day activities at work.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing. I also see we have another answer in the chat from Pankaj or Pankaj. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Hello, everyone. I'm Pankaj from India. I think the same as most stress for me as a leader is fulfilling the expectation of your coworkers. Okay, so when we have that external pressure in the form of what might other people want from me, what will make other people happy, this creates stress for you. This is what pressures you the most. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing. Anybody else? By the way, you can also think about situations where you were an informal leader. So on paper, you didn't have the title leader or manager, but you had to take responsibility for a group of people in a project, in a situation. Okay. Again, if somebody else feels like sharing something, feel free to write it in the chat because we'll have some other moments to discuss that as well. So, in the handout that I sent you, you have this table and it has a few more details. This is a summary of the 9 Enneagram types that we will touch on today. You see, we have 9 different Enneagram types. I start here with type 2 instead of type 1, simply because of the way Enneagram classifies the types into different groups, but that's not relevant right now. We have type 2, the helper, for example, my type, which tends to manifest externally as a supportive and generous type. That's more interpersonal. But deep down, there's a deep fear that maybe I'm not worthy of love. Maybe I need to earn that love from people. So this can manifest in certain behavioral tendencies that we will discuss in a moment. Another type that's very common for leadership roles or management roles is type 3, the achiever. It's probably one of the most common that I've seen in these roles. People who tend to be very competitive and energetic, and they really want success. They want to be the very best at what they do, but also because deep down, they have a deep fear of being worthless. If I don't have success, if I'm not the best at what I do, then I will not be worthy of love and appreciation from other people. I need to prove my worth through my success. And actually, this is a pattern that I think affects everybody to a certain extent, especially in our modern world. I see it with so many of my clients, and not all of them are type 3, that this pressure that our society puts on us to be successful in a certain way creates a lot of this fear of being worthless. And it's a very common pattern. And then we have other types like type 6, the loyalist, a very loyal, reliable, security-focused type, because deep down, they have a deep fear of being without support. So they keep looking for it externally in other situations, which can create a lot of anxiety. And so on and so forth. So this is just a summary for you to get the overall idea of what the 9 Enneagram types are, because for our workshop today, the point that I want to make is that this emotional drain, this insecurity that a lot of leaders experience, is very common for certain personality types. Of course, everybody can experience stress and insecurity as leaders, as managers, but for some people, it tends to be, on average, a little bit more challenging. Why? Because due to the certain insecurities that some of these Enneagram types have, there are certain behaviors, certain ways in which these people act, which show that they are projecting their inner insecurities onto the people that they work with, on the people in their team, on other coworkers, or perhaps their own managers or clients that they are responding to. And of course, I think, as we all know also from our personal lives, when we project too much onto other people, this tends to lead to conflict because people don't like to be attacked, especially if they feel that they didn't do that particular thing, or they don't like to be treated in a certain way because they think they don't deserve that. And this conflict sometimes is addressed, but in many situations, like Jean-Marie was saying, it's avoided. It is somewhere hidden. It is not part of the open of it conversation. It becomes the elephant in the room. And this constant addressed or non-addressed conflict leads to poor work relationships, and it affects performance negatively, the performance of the team and of the leader or the manager. So this is really why it's so important to understand what our own insecurities are, our own fears, and how we are motivated to avoid those fears because of our personality type, because this is the key to really unlocking our own potential as leaders. If we avoid the emotional triggers, if we avoid what is causing us difficulty, we will keep kind of being a victim of those emotions and insecurities. Something that I've learned in my experience is that the more clearly that we see who we really are and how we really feel and what our own toxic traits are sometimes, the better we are able to control them, even if we don't fully solve the problem forever. And to answer already one of the questions that you asked me at the beginning, how easy is it to rewire our responses? I think the best thing we can do is to recognize those things, to see them, to label them, to admit it, because that's really the first step to changing something behaviorally. So, what are some of the types that have these insecurities that can create more stress as leaders? Oh, yes, sorry. Before that, I wanted to give a brief introduction of the Enneagram, what it is. So for those of you who haven't explored the system yet or who haven't heard about it, the Enneagram of personality is a system. The same way that MBTI is a system, Enneagram is also a system. However, it's a little bit different from the MBTI because it has its roots in a more spiritual wisdom. Many people have collected insights from our ancestors from different communities and different parts of the world. And it seems like the symbol of the 9 is something that kept repeating itself. Some of these human traits and fears and insecurities seem to be quite common across the globe. So modern psychology has developed this theory and has created a more comprehensive guide to help us understand our own personality and that of other people. And what I find really powerful about the Enneagram is that it's not so much about simply describing certain traits that we have or certain behaviors that we do. It talks a lot about our inner life, our fears, our insecurities, our coping mechanisms that we developed as a response to those fears and insecurities. And it has a deep explanatorily power where it shows us that, okay, you behave like this and you have these stressors and these problems in your life because deep down there are these emotional fixations. And unless you see them and recognize them and start working with them, it will be very difficult to create that behavioral change that you want to create. So I think it's a very deep theory. I keep revisiting it every few years, and every time I feel like there are new insights emerging out of it because it is such a deep emotional theory or concept. So like I said, some of these personality types are more susceptible to feeling high stress and anxiety at work, especially when they are the ones leading or managing a team or a project, an experience, or anything along those lines, because of this deep emotional fixations. Enneagram 2, the helper or the giver. This is my type. Deep down, like the name suggests, this type is a type that really wants to be loved. And as a response to that fear, to that insecurity, the behaviors that are being shown to the world are people-pleasing, helping others, supporting others, being overly generous, trying to go out of our way to kind of help other people overcome their problems or to save other people. And I think the trick here for type 2s, but also for people around type 2s, is to believe that this is good. Because we tend to associate like helping people with being good. When in reality, if helping comes from a place of, I'm desperately looking for you to validate me, for you to love me no matter what, this can become a little bit toxic or more toxic, depending on the extent at which this behavior is being done. So what happens when type 2 types, basically type 2 individuals, take over leadership or manager roles is that they are people-pleasing, or we are people-pleasing people on our team. Like I said in my previous example at the beginning of the session, if I don't want to upset people because people in my team should like me, if my core motivation deep down is for people to validate me, to love me, to like me, etc., I will engage in some behaviors where maybe I don't delegate enough, I don't give them negative feedback, I'm not direct enough with the things that are not going well. So what will happen? The work still needs to be done. If they don't do it, I will have to do it. So I will overwork myself, and this is a clear path to burnout. This is something I experienced myself, and Enneagram was a big, big tool for me to understand why I was engaging in those behaviors. And it helped me put a stop to it, or at least to significantly decrease the amount to which I was doing that. Because when we don't delegate, we also don't empower people. And that's also not something that leaders should necessarily want to do. We want to empower people on our teams. Okay, another type that is very susceptible to this, I mentioned at the beginning, and it's actually one of the types that is most commonly found in leadership or manager roles, is Enneagram type 3, the hyperachiever. People with this type, like I said at the beginning, have this deep desire to also be worthy, because they learn from their childhood that if they don't perform, if they're not the very best at what they do, if they're not outstanding in their work, then they don't deserve love and appreciation. And I'm sure most of you can recognize some people like this in your life, maybe in yourself or people that you've worked with, people in your family. A lot of the times they climb the corporate ladder because they are so motivated and driven to be successful. They are charming, they are very hardworking and passionate. They tend to be more extroverted as well. So they tend to get promoted and achieve that success as CEOs even sometimes. But because sometimes they are really disconnected from their own value, what they truly care about deep down, their own authenticity, their own opinions, their own core values, they often feel like imposters because they feel like they took some shortcuts, they impressed other people, or they charmed other people with their external facade, and then they got promoted or they got the success or the money that they wanted. But deep down, they know that some of the things that they did are not fully true. And maybe they got more responsibilities that they can handle. My friend and my business partner is a type 3. And she often tells me that she feels that she often gets more responsibilities that she can handle because she kind of charms people into believing that she has the competence to do all those things. And then she feels like an imposter. And then this is a cycle where she wants to impress them continuously, but she has too much to do. So the impressing doesn't work anymore very well. And this can create a lot of anxiety and overwhelm for her as well. And yes, thank you, Tuan. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask in the chat or even interrupt me by raising your hand, and I'm very happy to answer any kind of questions. Okay. So for type 3, this is why when they're leaders or managers, they tend to get in that space of anxiety, burnout, feeling like they are completely overwhelmed, because that crippling self-doubt, that imposter syndrome, is a really powerful emotional pressure that they feel. Next one, which is actually not as common as type 2 or 3 in leadership roles, but it's a type that also struggles with this, is Enneagram type 4, the individualist or the romantic. This is a type who deeply desires to be different. They also want to be validated like type 2 and 3, but for them, it's not so much about people pleasing. It's not so much about professional success. It's more about their desire to stand out from the crowd by being different, being special, being authentic. And that sometimes makes them overly focus on their inner life. They tend to be some of the most introverted socially of the 9 Enneagram types. And they tend to really obsess over their inner life. How do I really feel? What is really important to me? And this is not bad per se. It's great to know how we feel and to connect to our feelings. But the challenge that type 4 has is that they overdo this, and sometimes they even exaggerate the negative feelings that they have. So what happens when they're in a leadership role? Imagine someone who is really sensitive, really preoccupied with their internal life, really focused on their negative emotions. They have a tendency to disconnect a little bit from the external world. And this means that they might neglect certain things that need to be done, or they might procrastinate in doing those things. For example, I also know someone in my personal life who's a 4, and she's a doctor, but she's also leading a small team. And she says she's often so overwhelmed in that role because she really struggles to take things to completion on time. She procrastinates a lot out of the anxiety that she experiences. And again, when the deadline approaches, this creates a very strong emotional overwhelm and a lot of stress for type 4 individuals. Okay, so we had type 2, type 3, type 4. The next type is type 6, the loyalist. This is also a type that can quite often be found in leadership roles, although they don't usually, from my observation, they don't usually necessarily go to the CEO role. Maybe they work as team leaders or managers in like smaller businesses or informal leaders. And the thing about type 6 is that their deepest desire is to be safe, because they feel like deep down, they cannot find that inner sense of safety and support. Like they cannot help themselves feel safe and supported. So they are constantly looking for it outside of themselves, in relationships, in jobs, in belief systems, in communities, and so on and so forth, which again is not bad per se, but they have a tendency to overdo it. And when they overdo it, this can be a little bit challenging for them to find that sense of safety and security in their day-to-day life. So again, they tend to overwork as leaders, maybe to not delegate enough, to try to exceed expectations because they're trying to find that safety and security. And that is a clear path to burnout. I saw that we have a question in the comments, how can we pinpoint a certain personality type? So there are many different things. The first one is to really understand the theory of the Enneagram, to understand what the main fear and motivations are for the 9 types. It's also helpful to look at the behaviors of someone. So for example, I sent you the handout with the traits that are most commonly associated with the type. You might kind of scan a little bit and say, this person seems to fit more the description of a 3 or a 4 or something. But then it's also very helpful to try to think about the fears and motivations. Is this person really struggling because they are afraid of being unloved? Or are they struggling more because they feel like they are not safe and they're constantly looking to find that safety and security? And my advice would be to not rush into this typing process, because sometimes things are different than what they actually look like in reality. Yes, and in the handout, the fears and desires are extremely important. The thing when you type other people is that it might be difficult to see the fears and desires immediately. You might need to observe them for a period of time or to talk to them directly and ask them questions. By the way, if you're interested, there's this book that I really love. It's called The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Rizzo and Hudson. And something they say in the book is that generally it's not recommended to try to excessively type other people. It tends to be better when people recognize these patterns in themselves. But still, if we do want to better understand, the traits are something we observe first, but then let's dig deeper. What is the core fear and motivation? Okay. And then the last type that I wanted to talk to you about today is type 9. Type 9 is known as the peacemaker and is also a type that can get very, very overwhelmed when they are leading or managing. Why? Being peacemakers, they don't want conflict. So maybe, Jean, an answer to your question, maybe some people that you work with are 9s. They have a deep desire to avoid conflict because what makes them do that is that they are afraid of separation. They are afraid of being separated from people that they love, from relationships that they care about. So in order to find that internal peace that they are so desperately looking for, they usually avoid conflict both in the external world when they interact with others, but also internally with themselves. You know, everybody experiences internal conflict sometimes. 9s have a tendency to try to avoid that. And almost like they're putting an internal wall to protect themselves from any kind of discomfort. So in their behavior as leaders, this tends to manifest in a tendency to really struggle to say no. So they say yes, even though they want to say no. And this adds up. And in time, they become very frustrated because I said yes to this and to this and to this, and I didn't want to do any of them. And now I'm really annoyed at you. So again, this is a clear path to burnout and poor work relationships. I also know someone in my personal life who's a 9 and a leader. He's leading a medical praxis. And in MBTI, he's an ISFJ, for those of you who are familiar with the system. So he's a very warm, nurturing, tolerant person. But because he's a 9, he tends to always try to avoid conflict. So his employees often bring a lot of requests. He says yes to everything. And then he's really frustrated and overwhelmed as a result of that. And you can see it on his face. He's angry, but he doesn't want to show it. He can't sleep because of the stress that this has caused, and has had many episodes of burnout. So it's a real thing. It's a real problem that happens in the world. It's not just the theoretical component. Now, like I said, the other types can also experience stress as leaders, but these 5 types struggle with it the most because of these inner insecurities and emotional fixations. So now that we went through the more theoretical perspective over the Enneagram, I would love to hear from you, maybe those who shared at the beginning, but also those who haven't yet. Do you have any example of a workplace stressor or difficult situation which you can now connect to the Enneagram? Maybe you see yourself more in a certain type based on what I've talked about, and you now understand better why that situation was a stressor for you. Take your time to reflect, and I would love to hear a little bit from you. I will stop my share screen. Maybe I would like to hear from Jean about the conflicts. Now that I talked a little bit about Enneagram 9, do you see any of those patterns either in yourself or in people that you work with, or maybe other types as well?
Well, when you describe the 9 as peacemakers, yeah, I do see those who are avoiding conflict as wanting to have that peace, or fear of loss of friendships or whatever it is. I do see that. So just acknowledge that that's true. And makes sense. But I'm not sure, having noticed that and named that, how does one work with it as a leader with your team? So that would be the next step, next question I would ask. I'm just curious.
So just to make sure I understood correctly, you are asking, if you have people with these types in your team, how do you better work with them as a leader?
Yeah. So having noticed it, or even, like,
so
talking about it. So then how? Yeah. Okay.
Something I could suggest here is bringing the elephant in the room on the table as a leader yourself, and giving the practical example that we can talk about it, and this will not lead to a complete disruption of our working relationships, because this is the deeper fear that the Enneagram 9 has. If I speak up, if I get into this conflict, then the relationships will dissolve. When the leader brings that empathy, that calm attitude, that supporting attitude, and then they integrate the conflict into it, like, I notice this problem, I'm expressing it to you in a non-violent way, and by the way, I'll cover that in a moment as well. Let's see how we can resolve this without our relationship dissolving. And this is something that tends to create safety and security. And the second thing, but this is more a long-term thing rather than a quick fix, is helping people with this type feel like what they have to say actually matters. Because what I've read about type 9 is that they grow up believing that what they have to say is not important. It doesn't matter. They are often like made to feel like they kind of have to sit in the background. So as leaders, we can empower these people by giving them a voice, encouraging them to share, to ask questions, to express their opinions. They might be reluctant at the beginning, but in time, this tends to grow beautifully with patience.
Thanks. That's helpful, and I think it's manageable. I think at least I could try that, how that lands with people, and keep trying it, even if it doesn't work for once or twice. And I think I can still approach and keep that strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe as another idea, it could also be possible that some of the people are type 2, because they also tend to be more conflict avoidant. So that can also be something to take into account.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I see we have another question. I want to ask how to say no to requests without feeling guilty as a type 2 leader. Yes, you hit a soft spot, because that's also something I've been dealing with. I will put the fears and desires here. So why do we feel guilty? We feel guilty because our opinion about ourselves is that we have to be this person who's always giving, supporting, helping, encouraging, and that's what makes me good. That's what's validating my identity as a person. The first step I would take is start deconstructing that belief. I've learned in my experience that sometimes saying no to people, setting boundaries with people, even giving constructive negative criticism, it can be more helpful to others than me being a people pleaser. I've had a lot of people in my life as a type 2 who have intimidated me. And because they intimidated me, I wanted to always say yes to all of their requests. But this didn't help them either. So actually, I was doing more harm to them as well by not saying no and clarifying what the problem was. When I started saying no and setting boundaries, even though it was very uncomfortable, I saw that they were like, wow, thank you for giving me this feedback. I had this problem with other people, but I didn't know why. And now that you gave me this insight, I learned something as well. So kind of making that association that when I say no, sometimes I can actually help the other person on a psychological level as well. And the other thing is understanding that if I say no to somebody, this will give them more clarity and will help them make better decisions. Because if I'm kind of like this, like, yeah, I will do it, but they can see that I'm not fully into it, there will be a lot of lack of clarity. And lack of clarity is also stressful for other people. So kind of try to rewire your brain to say that if I want to help others as a helper, I also need to say no, because that will help them as well. Did I answer your question? Or if you have subsequent questions to that. Yes, okay, good to know. Any other questions or sharings? If I can understand that this is a more sensitive personal topic, so if you don't feel comfortable to share with the whole group, it can also be very helpful to just take a note for yourself. How is it that through my Enneagram type, I'm allowing myself to be overwhelmed with stress as a leader, as a manager? And maybe reflect on that, write a little bit about it. It can also be very helpful. Okay. Anybody else?
Share about not just themselves, but if you know anyone in at work, colleagues or your boss is of a particular type, that it gives you that aha moment.
Yeah, so if you recognize your boss or your colleague as one of these types, and maybe now you can better understand why they're acting the way that they're acting. Okay.
Some of these, about half are intro, like, a bit more on the introverted side, which is like type 4, 5, 6, and 9. And I think the more extroverted type are probably type 3, 7, and 8.
Yeah. 6 I would put as a more ambiverted type. It's kind of in the middle, like not in MBTI terms, but if we speak of a scale, 6 would be kind of in the middle, in my opinion. But 4, 5, 9, 1 also tend to be more on the introverted side. Yeah.
Or does anyone have any need more clarity on what type they should fit in? Because I think usually people have like a bit not clear. I mean, they might find a bit of 2 or even 3 types.
Yeah.
They can identify with a few types as well. And I think it's very normal because I mean, you tend to have like a core type, and either it's because of the arrow or because it's just simply that it's normal to feel that you have more than, but you can feel more than one type.
Yes. What I always say to people when they say, oh, but I see this and this and this and this type in myself, that's absolutely normal, because all of these 9 types represent human tendencies. That's why they're on a circle and they're all connected to each other. It's just that some of them will be stronger for us and more painful, and others will not be as strong and as painful, even though in certain situations we can, feel like that. So maybe I'm not a type 1 perfectionist, but I will have certain perfectionistic tendencies sometimes. And like Tuan was saying, the tri-type, the arrow, these basically mean that we don't just have one dominant type, but we have some subtypes, kind of, which explain our personality in more complex terms. So yes, it's normal to relate to more than one. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, I'll go back to the presentation per se. And again, if something else comes up for you, please feel free to interrupt me or to write in the chat. So when it comes to using our Enneagram type for growth, the idea is that each type can grow and develop by learning from another type. So for example, I'm a type 2, the helper or the giver. And type 2 learns by looking at the positive qualities or characteristics of type 4. 4 is the individualist or the romantic. Why? Because type 2 is so obsessed with other people's needs and feelings and overlooks their own feelings and needs, whereas type 4 is much more connected to themselves. So the path of growth for type 2 is to learn as much as possible about themselves. What is it really that I'm feeling? What is it really that I need? What is it really that's important to me? What is it really that I want to do at the expense of what everybody else wants me to do? That's something I'm still working on, by the way. In certain relationships, it's easier. In others, it's not so easy. I'm very curious if anybody right now would like to share what they think their core type might be, even if you're not sure. And I'll explain to you what the direction of growth would be, what other type you could learn from. So maybe let's go back to the table. It will be easier. Here we have the summary. If anybody wants to share what they think their core type might be at this point, based on the conversation. So I will go on the assumption that type 3 is a very common type in leaders and managers who are stressed. Type 3, the achiever, develops as a person when they learn from type 6, the loyalist. Why? Because it's not so much about their ego anymore and trying to impress everybody, and it's more about connecting to a more humble self, where they are focused on being safe for other people, reliable, community-oriented, and rather than having these grandiose desires to impress everybody around them, they are now coming back to their groups, their communities, and trying to contribute with the resources that they have to help those communities thrive. Type 8 and 1 maybe. Okay, so 8 is the challenger. This is also common in leadership roles, although they tend to be a bit more confident in themselves as compared to type 3. Type 8 tends to be very dominant, assertive, independent, but in extreme cases, they can also become more aggressive. So their challenge as leaders sometimes is to kind of try to push others too much. And when they push others too much, others don't like it. And that can create trouble in the workplace. And actually, type 8 learns and develops by moving to type 2, the helper. So they take that very powerful energy that they have as people, and rather than always bossing people around and pushing people, they transform it into a more caring, nurturing, supportive attitude, which they can learn from type 2. And now they are empowering others. They are helping others grow rather than just trying to control them. And then you also said type 1. So I think Tuan will also relate here as a type 1. Type 1, the perfectionist or the reformer, is a type that tends to be very focused on doing things as well as possible, focused very much on perfecting things and putting a lot of pressure on themselves to be at a very high standard all the time. And they can learn very much from type 7, the enthusiast. Why? Because 7 is a type that is exploratory, freedom-oriented, likes to have fun when they are in their positive state. So it's very helpful for type 1 to learn how to relax by doing new activities, traveling, having fun, exploring what it means to not be so strict with themselves all the time. And now I lost the chat. Just 1 second. Type 2, as I neglect myself to help others. Yeah. So like I said, for type 2, the direction of growth is type 4. Reconnecting with yourself. learning to ask yourself, what is it that I need? Sometimes what I do for myself is in the morning, I take a quick reflection time and I say, how am I doing in terms of my needs today? My need for security, my need for safety, my need for food, for rest, for love. Which one is not fulfilled and what can I do about it? You can also explore that in a coaching setting, in a therapy setting, in a meditation setting where you take time for yourself to really connect with the internal world. Otherwise, people's expectations of you will keep pulling you in many different directions and you end up neglecting yourself. Yes. Okay. I know we have a few minutes left, so if anybody needs to leave earlier, I want to cover the rest of the material, and then I have a little bit more time to answer other questions if you have them. So some other tools that we can use, which are non-Enneagram tools, but they complement it very well, are the following. The first one, nonviolent communication, also known as NVC. It's a tool that was created by Marshall Rosenberg, and it basically shows us how can we communicate a negative message in the workplace or in our personal lives so that we have a stronger chance of solving the conflict or the problem. So it says the following: if you have a negative feedback to communicate to somebody, you should follow the 4 steps of nonviolent communication. State the facts, explain how that situation made you feel, explain why it is important to you, the problem, the issue, and suggest future improvements. So the idea is that you should state what happened in the past rather than your interpretation of it, because that's what we tend to do when people feel offended and they don't want to communicate with us anymore. Then you talk about yourself, how you felt and what's important to you in that situation, rather than pointing fingers. You are the horrible person. You did this, you did that. And then you bring a more proactive attitude, which is, let's talk about the future. What can be changed or improved in the future? And here you can invite the other person to also share what they think. So I love this tool. I use it all the time. Another one is, like I mentioned, something very important for type 2 and also for type 3 is intrapersonal intelligence. So spending more time with one's inner world rather than with external expectations. Learning to recognize emotions. For example, we have a tool called the Wheel of Emotions that you can use. It's freely available online to help you label what it is that you're feeling. Because once we do that, we say, oh, I feel angry right now, or oh, I feel sad right now. Naming those feelings really helps with diffusing the intensity. And there's actual neuroscientific support for this idea that when we label our feelings and we verbalize them, there is a deactivation of the amygdala and more activation of the prefrontal cortex, which means we become more rational about the situation rather than overwhelmed by our feelings. Finding ways to work with the emotion. This is a longer topic, but it can include, for example, engaging in different sports, especially for anger or stress. Sports can be great ways to release that tension. Or engaging in creative or artistic activities where you paint or you draw or you write, and that can also be a great release of your emotions. I love poetry. I love writing. It's great for me to release tension. And then also journaling, practicing meditation or yoga or other embodiment practices, and simply talking to someone. Sometimes it really helps to tell your colleague, your friend, hey, I'm really stressed, and opening up and sharing what it is that you're feeling. Sometimes it can even be enough. Another tool that I like using is what is known as PICA, and it's used a lot in life coaching as well. And the acronym PICA stands for 4 different steps when it comes to our feeling. Pause at the first physical sign. Identify how you would typically react. Change your pattern to a positive and act on this energy. So I'm going to give you an example. You might say, my shoulders feel tense, or I feel pressure on my chest. This is the first physical sign that a negative emotion is with me. I notice. Then I ask myself, normally when I'm angry or stressed and I feel these things in my body, how do I react? Well, I tend to scream at my colleagues or at my employees. Okay, we know that's not helpful. So how can I change my pattern to a positive? What can I do instead? And you can say, I can take 10 minutes to breathe, to be with myself, maybe to write about how I'm feeling or to talk to somebody else, and then come back to the situation and address the problem with my colleagues. And that would be acting on this energy when you actually implement the change that you came up with as a solution. Or of course, it can be other emotions and other reactions. This is just an example. You can do it by yourself, or you can do it together with a coach or a therapist who can also guide you through this process. And then this is the tool that I mentioned earlier that as a type 2 I found to be extremely helpful. Fill your cup. I like to imagine that people's needs come in the form of cups. One cup represents belonging, one represents the need for freedom, another one the need for self-esteem, and so on and so forth. The problem is when we neglect one of these needs and the level of fulfillment of that cup goes down, or the cup completely empties out, then I will feel very frustrated, and that will constantly create stress, anxiety, overwhelm, burnout, and so on and so forth. So it can be very helpful to monitor your own needs by imagining these cups and asking yourself, which one of these cups needs my attention? Which one of my needs needs me to be proactive about it and to find a solution? So if you feel like your need for freedom is very low, maybe it's time to take the weekend off and go do something spontaneous. If your need for food is low, then maybe it's time to go and eat something nutritious. And you get the idea. Okay, and before we go to the last part of questions and answers, Tuan and I also wanted to share with you that we have put together a course, the Self-Mastery series, which is a course that comprises of 6 different modules, whose hope or whose desire is to help people build a long-term foundation of understanding what is holding them back and managing their stress in order to achieve your goals. So in tune with the theme of today's webinar, the idea is to learn how can I manage my feelings, my stress, my anxiety better in order to feel like I'm managing myself, that I'm calm, that I'm connected. It's a combination of using Enneagram as a powerful transformational tool together with other psychology and coaching-based tools. It's completely online. It's a 6-week transformative program, and we will be running it for the first time in the upcoming weeks. So for people who are interested, you have this QR code on the right. If you just want to read a little bit more or ask us some additional questions and show us your interest, you can do that. The idea is that it will be a personalized series. So we want to keep the group small so we can have as much interaction with you as possible, to be able to answer your questions and to give you feedback. From one session to the other, we will have different practical exercises to do so that you get to apply the things that you learn and that they don't stay only at a mental level, in the mental space. And of course, I think it's also important to mention for people who sign up at the beginning, the first 6 to 8 students who sign up in June 2024, we have 50% off. So the whole series will be 290 Singapore dollars. Tuan, if you want to add anything as well about Self-Mastery series.
No, I guess this is we have been run. So this one is like the second course after the first course, which we have been running before, is more about MBTI, and it's more like a foundation or learn about personality and typology. And this next course is focusing more on emotional mastery and the Enneagram. Using the Enneagram is one of the main framework. So it's it's quite interesting and exciting thing that we are trying this out, and that's why we are having this pilot launch offer. And Teodora will be one of the main instructor for this. So I think it's a very good opportunity, and yeah, we get very good feedback for the foundation course, and so yeah, if you are keen to explore more in depth, because this Enneagram mastery course is way more in depth. I would say it's very personal. So yeah, and this is like something that one of the few courses I know today nowadays that really focuses on self-awareness to build a core foundation. And yeah, it's if you take this course in the future, you can take other courses as well under our human minds. Yeah, I think it's a very good foundation as well.
Yeah. So again, if it sounds interesting to you, feel free to reach out to us, and we are very happy to answer any other questions. Back to our main topic for today. So we explored why certain types are more likely to experience stress and anxiety at the workplace, what makes certain Enneagram types more susceptible to that, and what can be done to work with that. And we explored some of the tools, both Enneagram-based tools of learning from other Enneagram types and some other practical tools like I mentioned here, Fill Your Cup, PICA, intrapersonal intelligence, and nonviolent communication. Before we go to the last Q&A session, I just want to leave you with my favorite quote of all times that really inspires my work from Carl Jung: who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. I think it has a very strong resonance for why self-awareness is so, so important. So I want maybe this to be the idea that you build from today onwards, based on what we talked about with respect to Enneagram, emotional fixations, stress, and overwhelm at the workplace. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I know it's a few minutes past, 9:30 Singapore time. If anybody needs to disconnect, feel free to do that. And if anybody has other questions, I can stay for another few minutes to answer them. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you also. Bye-bye. So questions or comments or some other short pieces of awareness, if anybody has that, I'm happy to answer. If not, I wish you a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening. Elaine, if you have any...
Yeah, Elaine, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Thank you to you as well.
Elaine is one of the regular member I meet up in Singapore.
Have you met in person as well?
Yeah, she's one of my.
Yeah.
I'm her coach actually. She's one of my coach.
Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think she never missed any of my session.
Awesome. So Elaine, if you have any questions, anything you would like to add? Okay, good night. Good night to you too.
What is Firefly's note take? Are you from you?
No, I think it's Elaine's note taker, because it was called NG, but I'm not sure.
Okay, interesting. You have an AI take. Okay.
Yeah, I have a few clients who do that as well. Yeah, okay.
Stop recording.